Hi guys, Robin here. So last week I published a new video related to Vanguard's stock market prediction for the upcoming decade up until 2031, and the future isn't that bright according to their predictions. So if you haven't watched that video yet, make sure you do so. I'll leave a link to that video in the description below. So in a nutshell, as you can see in this chart, the US stocks chart, they expect that the US stocks will perform much worse for the upcoming 10 years than they did for the last 10 years. So as you can see, the big green line is the last 10 years. So the annualized return for the last 10 years was 13.4%. But for the upcoming decade, they expect much lower returns. So somewhere between 0.6% annualized return to 5.8% annualized return. So what Vanguard used for their US stocks predictions was the MSCI US Broad Market Index. So this index contains more than 3,000 publicly traded companies in the US, which represents 99% of the US equity universe according to their website. And it's pretty similar to the S&P 500, since the top 10 holdings of this index are pretty much the same, if not are identical to the S&P 500 top 10 holdings. So in other words, if you're like many personal investors, and if you're like me, you have a pretty significant portion of your portfolio allocated to the S&P 500. And reading that they expect lower and kind of bad returns for the S&P 500 isn't a really positive thing to hear, in my opinion. To give you a better idea of Vanguard's prediction, let's make it more real by using numbers and an investment calculator. So the numbers I'm going to enter in this investment calculator are my numbers, but of course you can use this investment calculator yourself, so you can see for yourself what kind of returns you can expect for the upcoming decade if Vanguard's predictions are correct. So this is my current portfolio. I have close to 180,000 euros invested, and I have 30,000 euros in profit. So as you can see, I have 1,484 shares of the Vanguard S&P 500 ETF, which is a bit more than 110,000 euros. So this is my highest position. So I also have 541 shares of the Vanguard All World ETF with a total value of 57,000 euros. So the All World ETF has an exposure of 60% to the US. So this means that of that earlier number of that 57,000 euros, 34,000 is exposed to the US, besides the S&P 500 exposure of the 110,000 euros I already have. So if you add those numbers together, I have a total exposure to US stocks of 144,000 euros, somewhat around that number. So coming back to the investment calculator, so €1 is around $1.16 at the moment. So 144,000 euros is $166,000. So if we try the worst case scenario for the US stocks, so that's 0.6% for the upcoming 10 years. So if I enter 0.6 here, so for 10 years, and if I do zero additional attribution and I press the calculate button, so my end balance will grow to $177,000, and it's a bit over $10,000 in interest in 10 years. So again, according to Vanguard simulation, this is the worst case scenario, as you can see in that earlier chart. So that earlier chart I just showed you, here is 0.6%. So that's the worst case scenario. So if we instead use the 13.4% of the actual annualized return of the last 10 years, let's try that. So if we do 10.4%, calculate, we'll end up with a total end balance of $586,000 with a total interest of $419,000. So that's a really big difference. So if we use the median here, so which is the dotted line, so 3.2%, if we use that in the investment calculator, so 3.2%, and we press calculate, so with no additional attribution after 10 years with a starting amount of where I'm at now, we'll end up with an end balance of $228,000. So a total interest of $61,000. So that's already a big difference than the 0.6% annualized return, because that was only $10,000. So lastly, there is the possible 5.8% annualized return for the next decade. And if we enter 5.8% in the investment calculator as the annualized return rate and we press calculate, we'll end up with a total end balance of $293,000 with a total interest of $126,000. So again, a big difference with the annualized return of 0.6%. And of course, no one knows for sure whether Vanguard's predictions will come true or not, but I do want to allocate more of my portfolio to non-US stocks based upon their research, because according to their simulation, non-US stocks will perform much better, as you can see on the right-hand graph over here. So this is the non-US stocks. So the actual annualized return for the last 10 years was 4%, but they now expect somewhat in between here. So between 3.5% and 8.7% for non-US stocks. So that's a big difference than the US stocks. So for example, I came across this ETF, the Vanguard All World ex-US ETF. But the problem is the Giro, so the broker I use, does not offer this ETF here in Europe. But if you click on the portfolio tab of their ETF, you can see their allocation. You can see it here. And there you see that their allocation is 25% to the emerging markets, 40% to Europe, and 27% to the Pacific. Whereas this ETF has the most significant allocation to Japan. So if you scroll down a little bit, you can see the market allocation. Here you see that the most is allocated to Japan, which is close to 17%. So because I want to have a higher exposure to non-US stocks, so there is a chance I will start to buy other ETFs, so like this one. So this one is the Europe ETF. And there is also this one. This is the Developed Asia Pacific ETF. And as you can see here in my portfolio, I already have a little bit, like around 3% allocated to the Emerging Markets ETF. But the problem is all Pacific ETFs I could find have the ex-Japan in their title. So they do not include Japan stocks. And the thing is, if you go back to the earlier ETF, which has the All World ex-US stocks, the biggest allocation of this ETF in regards to what market is Japan, like 17%. So in other words, if I want to buy individual ETFs to gain a higher exposure to non-US stocks, I also need to buy a separate Japan ETF. And as you can see, this path requires far more maintenance than just having the ability to buy one ETF. So let's say, for example, the All World ETF. So I haven't decided yet whether or not I take the path to purchase all those individual ETFs. So for now, last week, for example, I purchased 10,000 euros worth of All World ETF shares, like I did for the past months. And as you can see here, in September I also added 1,000 euros to my Coinbase account. So every week there is an automatic Bitcoin purchase scheduled for 200 euros. So last week my purchases in October, so last month basically, was month number 13 in a row that I purchased more than 10,000 euros worth of shares and also a little bit of Bitcoin. So every month I purchased for 10,000 euros. And if you're interested to follow my financial independence journey, you can do so over at my website creatoract.com. So if you go to my website creatoract.com, you can scroll down a little bit where you see follow my financial independence journey, where you can click on the latest blog post. So let's say September 2021, for example. And I think these blog posts are pretty interesting. So if we quickly skim this blog post, for instance, so in each of these blog posts I start off with my net worth. So at the beginning of the month, so last month, my net worth was $347,000. So I also talk about my business. How much revenue does my business make? So in September 2021, for example, my revenue of my business was $13,516, for example. I talk about my business expenses, so the net profit. So I had a net profit of $9,382. I talk about my personal spendings. So how much do I personally spend besides my business expenditures? And of course, I talk about my total investments. I talk about how much cash I have. So for example, looking at my total net worth, I'm currently 67% invested. So $234,000 is invested, whereas the other 33% sits in cash. And I always find it really interesting to track those numbers. So every single month I track these numbers. And I'm curious, do you also know how much you have invested and how much you have in cash? If so, let me know in the comments. And furthermore, of my total investments, I have 78% in stocks, as you just saw my stock portfolio. And I also have 21% in cryptos. And to go even deeper, of my total investments, so of those $234,000 invested, I have 53% invested in the S&P 500, 18% in Bitcoin, 22% in the All World ETF, 3% in the Emerging Markets ETF, and 3% in Ethereum. So it's really nice to know where you are invested. And then moving back to my net worth, so I currently have 15% invested in crypto, 53% in stocks, and of my total crypto assets, I have 85% in Bitcoin. So I also talk about how many hours I work per day. For example, in September, I worked for a total of 68 hours. So that's roughly 15 working hours per week. And that might not seem that much, but these working hours are really productive hours. The toilet breaks, lunchtime, and so forth are not included in those hours. So that's it basically. If you want to read more of these blog posts for the upcoming month as well. So it's now November 3, so I need to publish the October one anytime soon. So if you want to read that one, make sure to check out my website creatoract.com for my latest blog post. So this was the biggest reason of me making this new video related to the same Vanguard stock market prediction for the upcoming 10 years, because I wanted to be a little bit more clear what kind of returns you can expect based upon their predictions. So I think most of you guys also have a high allocation to US stocks, so the S&P 500, and I'm pretty curious to hear whether or not you are thinking about allocating a bigger portion to non-US stocks. So try to buy like an ETF I just showed you that didn't include US stocks. Whether or not you are planning to allocate more of your portfolio to non-US stocks, let me know in the comments below. I'm curious to hear your strategy. Make sure to click the like button if you appreciate this kind of content, and also make sure to subscribe if you haven't done so already, so you won't miss my next video. Thanks for watching, have a nice day, and until next time. Bye bye.